I'm Emmy Victor, the host of our new four-part series, Energizing the Economy, where we look at how the energy industry is powering America's economic recovery. As the country grapples with the economic effects of COVID-19, industry leaders are looking to the future on how to spark an economic resurgence. One key sector expected to have a leading role is energy, but are all oil and gas resources being tapped to its fullest potential? Let's welcome our guest, Barney Bishop, who is the former Florida Democratic Party Executive Director and former Associated Industries of Florida CEO and President, and who currently runs Barney Bishop Consulting to discuss Florida's opportunities in oil and gas. Hi, Barney, and welcome to the program.
Thanks, Emmy. Pleasure to be here.
When you served as CEO and president of the Associated Industries of Florida, how did your organization work with oil and gas companies, and what benefits did it bring to the local economies?
Sure, that's a great question. We work very closely with oil and gas companies because that's part of the national security issue that we all have as Floridians and as Americans, to make sure that when you flip on the switch, when you go into a room, that switch actually cuts on the light. And of course, Florida is a huge tourism state. And as a result, tourism depends on fossil fuel, oil and gas, to be able to get around either by airplanes or by cars or by buses or by boats. So it's all a very critical issue in the state of Florida. And of course, as well, we're a peninsula, so we're surrounded by water. And it's a very key issue for Floridians going forward.
In the wake of the current pandemic, many oil and gas companies have contributed hand sanitizer, masks, other medical equipment to communities across the country. Can you address how the efforts of the oil and gas community provided support in Florida?
Sure, they have been absolutely super. They have been donating supplies of PPE, of food, of water, volunteers, manpower to nonprofit associations all across the state, some of which can't afford that without some assistance from somebody. And so the oil and gas industry has been extremely helpful in that regard, and also providing transportation when needed to get some of those supplies to the location where it needs to get to. So we're very thankful and appreciative for the oil and gas industry, what they have done, their level of donation and support for Floridians during this terrible pandemic.
Speaking about the coast, the issue of offshore leases in Florida has long been a hot topic. What are some of the benefits from offshore leasing to Florida? And what do you say to fellow Democrats who oppose offshore leasing on environmental grounds?
Sure. Well, and there's valid arguments on both sides, Emmy. But the truth of the matter is that, number one, the most important issue for Americans is our national security. And the largest user of oil and gas in the United States is the United States Armed Forces. So we've got to keep them ready. We've got to keep them on alert. And we've got to make sure that national security is the number one issue for this country, because we have to protect ourselves from whoever might be our enemies or terrorists. Number two, it's important to Florida because, again, tourism is so much based on oil and gas, and everybody uses that to be able to get around, except for those people that are on electric cars. And even that, in the manufacturing of those electric cars, takes oil and gas energy. So the truth of the matter is this is a very important issue, and it's very beneficial to the state of Florida. It could create a lot of jobs. Of course, the concern is always either about the shipment of those through a pipeline, where a pipeline might break, or in fact, having a drilling rig off the coast of Florida, where it might be unsightly to have at a beach. But the way that the oil and gas industry works today is they can drill with having a rig underneath the water. It could be beyond the horizon, which is about 10 or 11 miles that you normally see, so that you would never see that. I think that for a lot of people in the state of Florida, if I thought that there was oil or gas in my backyard, I'd be willing to put up a drilling rig right now. But there's going to be a lot of people that don't believe that. Even if it's in their own backyard, they want to keep the environment pristine, and that's a valid argument. But there's a way to make sure that both of these meet and there's compromise available.
You recently noted that the Interior Department's Land and Water Conservation Fund, the recipient of offshore lease tax revenue, has already directed more than $1 billion to Florida conservation programs in the Everglades, St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuges, and Big Cypress Natural Preserve. Could you highlight how offshore leasing can support conservation programs in Florida?
Sure, we can support them because if we allowed more drilling, then that would produce more revenue. That revenue would then be able to go into more environmental programs. So the question is, whether it's going to be drilling in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, which when I was at Associated Industries of Florida back in the early 2000s, we were the first business group to endorse that concept when Governor Jeb Bush came out in favor of it. And I've written some pieces since then indicating that drilling on the eastern seaboard in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Florida beyond the horizon is another place where drilling could take place. And the revenues from that could be supportive of jobs, of industry, would be helpful to the state's budget. And then, of course, those dollars that from the revenue royalties could then be used to enhance environmental programs around the state of Florida.
Barney, we are less than 100 days away from November's presidential election. What do you think the Democratic Party can do, or presumptive nominee Joe Biden can pledge, to demonstrate support for America's oil and gas companies?
Sure. I think the most important thing is if Joe Biden becomes president of the United States is to make sure don't put this industry out of business, because we're going to need fossil fuel for even under his plan until at least 2030, another 10 years, more likely another 20 or 30 years to 2015 and beyond as we transition to some alternative energies. And the oil and gas industry has been very involved in that. They're very involved in alternative energy. They're investigating that. They're investing in that. They're making a commitment to try to move us all in that direction of less harm to the environment. So I think the message to Mr. Biden is don't put this industry out of business, because that's not going to help our country's national security. It's certainly not going to help Florida or other states that are dependent on tourism. And we're a very fast growing state. So construction and people coming to our state, moving here for taxes, for the weather, for the quality of life, all of those things are so critical. And the oil and gas industry can play a role and is playing a role and should continue to play a role in leadership in making sure that we get to a safe environment, but one also that guarantees our national security.
Barney, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
And it was a pleasure to be with you today as well. Thank you.
And I hope you'll all join us next time for our series, Energizing the Economy.